Hi and Assalamualaikum everyone. Today we are going to explain about the differences between three types of International Standard Organization ISO, which is ISO 14001, ISO 9001 and ISO 45001, starting from clause 4 to clause 10. Before that, I'm going to introduce to you who will present all these clauses. Starting from me, Wana and Shukrina will be continued by Nurlina Nadira, Nur Emilia, Fadila Iliana, Nur Syafiqah, Faizatul Husna and Nur Syafiqah Atira respectively. Now, let me tell you the meaning of all these ISO. The first one is ISO 14001. It is the international standard that specifies requirements for an effective environmental management system (EMS). It provides a framework that an organization can follow rather than establishing environmental performance requirements. The next one is ISO 9001. It is the international standard for a quality management system (QMS). In order to be certified to the ISO 9001 standard, a company must follow the requirements set in this standard. This standard is used by organizations to demonstrate their ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and regulatory requirements and to demonstrate continuous improvement. The last one is ISO 45001. It is the new ISO standard for occupational health and safety (OHS). It aims to provide a safe and healthy workplace for employees and visitors. Clause 4 is the context of the organization. There are 4 subclauses. The first subclause is about understanding the organization and its context. For each of the subclause, the organization should determine the external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and strategic direction that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes for environmental, quality and occupational health and safety management system. The second subclause is about understanding the needs and expectations of workers and interested parties. The organization shall determine the interested parties and the requirements of the interested parties and also to the workers that are relevant to the environmental, quality and also occupational health and safety management system. The next clause is about determining the scope of this ISO. The organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability of this ISO to establish these scopes. There are also several things that need to be considered, such as external and internal issues, its authority and ability to exercise control and influence, the requirements of relevant interested parties, and take into account the planned or performed work-related activities. Last but not least, what the organization should do to achieve the intended outcomes. Generally, the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve all of these management systems, including the processes needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. There are some additions for ISO 9001, such as the organization need to determine the inputs required and output expected, sequence and interaction of these processes. The organization also need to maintain the documented information to support the operation of its processes and retain documented information to have confidence that the processes are being carried out as planned.
Next is Clause 5. Clause 5 is leadership. It has 3 main points, which is leadership and commitment, organizational policy, and organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. For leadership and commitment, the top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the 3 ISO, which is ISO 14001, ISO 9001, and ISO 45001 system by taking accountability for the effectiveness of the system. Ensure that the policy and objectives are established and compatible with the strategic direction and context of organization. And third is ensure the integration resources needed and intended outcomes that an organization needs to achieve. For organizational policy, for ISO 14001, The policy of environmental system should appropriate to the purpose and context of the organization, including the nature, scale, and environmental impact of its activities, products, and services. For ISO 9001, the top management should establish, implement, and maintain a quality policy that help meet the needs of their customer and other stakeholders more effectively. For ISO 45001, includes a commitment to provide safe and healthy working conditions for the prevention of work-related injury, ill health, and appropriate to the purpose, size, and context of the organization to the specific nature of its occupational health and safety, risks, and opportunities. For organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities, first is ISO 14001. The top management shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned and communicated within the environmental management system organization. Second is ISO 9001. Top management shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated, and understood within the organization. Third is ISO 45001. The top management shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles within the occupational health and safety management system are assigned and communicated at all levels within the organization and maintained as documented information.
Next, we will continue with Clause 6, which is planning. For ISO 14001, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the processes needed to meet the requirement in general, environment aspect, compliance obligation, and planning actions. For ISO 9001, the organization shall consider the external and internal issue, also determine risks and opportunities that need to be addressed too. For ISO 45001, the organization shall consider the external and internal issues, requirement of interest parties, and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed too. For ISO 14001 is about environmental aspect, compliance obligations, and planning action, while in ISO 19001, the organization plan the action to address risks and opportunities, integrate and implement actions into its QMS, and evaluate the action effectiveness. For ISO 45001 is about hazard identification, determination of legal requirement, and planning actions. For subclass 6.2, ISO 14001 focus on environmental objective, while ISO 9001 focus on quality objective, and ISO 45001 focus on OSHA objective. 6.2.2 in ISO 14001 is planning action to achieve environmental objective, while in ISO 45001 is planning action to achieve OSHA objective. 6.2.2 in ISO 19001 is planning actions to achieve quality objective, including 6.3, which is planning the need for changes to QMS.
Class 7 is support. It has 5 subtopics: resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information. I will compare two subtopics, competence and awareness. First is competence. For ISO 14001, the necessity of person doing their work under its control that affects its environmental performance. Workers who are assigned responsibilities for the environmental management system, those who are determine and evaluate environmental impacts, contribute to the achievement of the environmental objective, respond to emergency situation, perform internal audits, and also perform evaluation of compliance. For ISO 9001, the necessity of person doing work under its control that affects the performance and effectiveness of its QMS. It can be done by training, mentoring, reassignment of currently employed person, also hiring or contracting of competent person. For ISO 45001, the necessity of workers that affects or can affect its OSHA's performance. Workers should identify hazard on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience, and also applicable take action to acquire and maintain the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. Workers also can appropriate documented information as evidence as for competence. Next is for awareness. For ISO 14001, the organization should ensure that persons doing work under its control are aware of the environmental policy, the significant environmental aspect, and related actual or potential environmental impact associated with their work. For ISO 9001, the organization should ensure that persons doing work under its control are aware of the quality policy, relevant quality objective, their contribution to the effectiveness of the QMS, including the benefits of improved performance. For ISO 45001, workers should be made aware of the OSHA's objective and their contribution to the effectiveness of the OSHA's management system.
Hi, I will continue to the clause 8, which is operation. Operation defined as requirements for some key processes required to run business. Now, I will explain to all of you the general definition for each type of ISO. For ISO 14001, operation deals with the execution of the plans and processes that enables the organization to meet their environmental objectives. For ISO 45001, you will be required to control not only implementation and plan changes to processes, but also to unintended and unplanned changes. For ISO 9001, this clause includes the process of communicating with the customers, reviewing their requirements, designing the products, and others. For subclass 8.1, which is operational planning and control, each ISO highlights that the organization should establish, implement, control, and maintain the process needed and to implement the actions. The organization should control the planned changes and review the consequences of unintended for ISO 14001 and ISO 9001. For ISO 45001, there is reduction of OH and S risks using the hierarchy of control. For subclass 8.2, which is emergency preparedness and response, it is stated in ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 only, which is the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain a process needed to prepare for and respond to potential emergency situations. Since the ISO 9001 is more about quality management system that help organization meets the needs of their customers, hence it has requirements for products and services different operation from other ISO. The organization shall ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirements for products and services to be offered to customers. The organization shall conduct a review before committing to supply products and services to a customer.
Okay, so now I will explain about clause 9, which is performance evaluation. 9.1.1 in ISO 14001, the organization shall ensure that calibrated or verified monitoring and measurement equipment is used and maintained as appropriate. In ISO 9001, the organization shall evaluate the performance and the effectiveness of the quality management system. In ISO 45001, the organization shall evaluate the OSH management system. In 9.1.2 in ISO 14001, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the process needed to evaluate fulfillment of its compliance obligations. In ISO 9001, the organization shall monitor customers' perceptions of the degree to which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. In ISO 45001, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain a process for evaluating compliance with legal requirements and other requirements. In 9.1.3 in ISO 9001, the organization shall analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information arising from monitoring and measurement. For 9.2.1 in ISO 14001, the organization shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the environmental management system For ISO 45001, the organization shall conduct internal audits at a planned intervals to provide information on whether the OSH management system. In 9.2.2, the organization shall ensure that the results of the audits are reported to relevant management in ISO 14001, but in ISO 9001, the organization shall plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit programs including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, consultation, planning, requirement, and reporting, which shall take into consideration the importance of the process concerned and the results of previous audit. In ISO 45001, the organization shall ensure that relevant audit results are reported to workers, and where they exist workers, representative, and other relevant interested parties. 9.3, which is management review. In ISO 14001, top management shall review the organization environmental management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing sustainability, adequacy, and effectiveness. In ISO 9001, the management shall review the organization's quality management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. In ISO 45001, top management shall review the organization OSH management system at planned interval to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness.
Next, I will continue for the last clause, which is clause 10, improvement. This clause has three parts, which are general, non-conformity, and continual improvement. For general, ISO 14001 is accomplish the intended outcomes of its environmental management system. ISO 9001 is to meet customer requirements, enhance customer satisfactions, and ISO 45001 is to achieve the intended outcomes of its occupational health and safety management system, OH&S. In non-conformity and corrective action, for ISO 14001, the organization shall react to the non-conformity, evaluate the need, and most importantly, make changes to the EMS when the non-conformity occurs. For ISO 9001, the organization should take the same action as ISO 14001 and makes changes to the QMS, while ISO 45001 are divided into two parts. In 10.2.1 is about what action should be taken by organization when the non-conformity occurs, just like other ISO, and 10.2.2 are discussing about the documented information that organizations shall retain. In 10.3, which is continual improvement, the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS to enhance environmental performance in ISO 14001, while in ISO 9001, the organization shall improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness QMA, and organization consider the result of analysis and evaluation if there are opportunities for continual improvement. And lastly, the organization in ISO 45001 shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of a OH&S system.